Welcome to episode 251 of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU. I'm your host and fellow student, Michelle Nelson, and together we'll learn the basics of home design and construction and demystify the building process so we can make informed decisions and build quality dream homes with or without a general contractor. From large things like garage doors to small things like electronic chips that go into TVs and appliances, the materials that we need to build and furnish our homes are still hard to get. More than 2 years after the start of the pandemic, supply chain issues continue to cause significant construction slowdowns and above average pricing in home building. So when will supply chain issues end? That's the million-dollar question. And the truth is, no one really knows. But there are opinions out there. And that's what we'll talk about in this episode. As you probably realize, the answer to when will things get back to normal is relevant to anyone who's building or remodeling a house. Because as long as there are interruptions and delays in the supply chain, there will also be interruptions and delays in construction. Your new build or remodeling project is likely to cost you more time and money than it would if the supply chain weren't having so many challenges. Let's talk about exactly what the supply chain is and when experts are predicting a return to normalcy. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell BYHYU and the Patriots Farmhouse how much I appreciate you for leaving our latest Apple Podcasts 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you so much for your kind words and for supporting the show by publicly endorsing the podcast. BYHYU says they appreciate my stick-to-itness for keeping the podcast going. And the Patriots Farmhouse says they love the podcast and wish that the podcast were every day. Well, listen, this podcast has been a labor of love, but it has definitely been a labor. So as much as I wish I could get you more episodes, I just don't have the time right now. But I am very grateful that my work is appreciated and that it's helped you out. Thank you for encouraging me. Now, speaking of not having time to do more content, I also want to apologize to you for missing an episode last week. Y'all, I feel so guilty when I can't get content out to you when you're expecting it. Right now, though, I have a few too many balls in the air. And on top of that, my full-time job, which is in healthcare, is incredibly busy. I've regularly worked 12 to 15-hour days in the last several weeks. So those aren't excuses, they're just facts. I'm doing the best I can, I promise, and I'm getting you as much content as I can with the time and mental and physical endurance that I have. So please be patient with me. All right, let's talk about the supply chain and what it is exactly. Well, the supply chain is defined as the entire process of making and selling materials and goods, from acquiring raw materials to manufacturing to distribution and sale. So obstacles in the supply chain wreak havoc on the process of getting products from the manufacturing stage to their final destinations. Pandemic-induced shutdowns and slowdowns in manufacturing, winter storms, labor shortages, and congestion at ports, compounded by record-high demands for residential construction materials, have seriously strained the supply chain. And most recently, the supply chain has been negatively affected by exorbitant fuel prices. So problems in the supply chain are making getting and paying for building materials difficult, to say the least. Like we've discussed before, the pandemic didn't eliminate spending. Instead, it shifted spending. People stopped spending money at restaurants and on vacations, sporting events, and going to the movies. And what they started spending on was stuff for their homes. They bought things that would make them happier and more comfortable in their homes. Or they decided to build brand new homes. People were putting more of their income toward tangible stuff, especially house stuff, rather than experiences. The increase in demand for products, especially in the midst of a season of fewer laborers, put a terrible strain on the supply chain. And when demand is high and supply is low, prices and wait times increase. That's the problem. Now, when will it end? According to a writer at the New York Times, quote, "It will require investment, technology, and a refashioning of the incentives at play across global business. It'll take more ships, additional warehouses, and an influx of truck drivers, none of which can be conjured quickly or cheaply. Many months and perhaps years are likely to transpire before the chaos subsides." End quote. A supply chain management professor at ASU's W.P. Carey School of Business said, quote, "Despite prices being so high, consumers have continued to spend, likely due to savings that they've been pocketing over the last 2 years." End quote. He previously thought that it would be the end of 2022 when we'd see improvement in the supply chain problems. But now he's saying we're going to see this problem potentially stretch into the first quarter of 2023. That sentiment is also held by Paul Imrath, Vice President of Survey and Housing Policy Research with the National Association of Home Builders. He said that the construction industry has a labor problem that predates the pandemic, but that it was exacerbated as workers quit or became sick and unable to work at job sites for the last 2 years. That means even as people return to work, there's still probably going to be too few laborers. Here's why that matters to those of us building a house. One source said that the average home build is taking 75 days longer as compared to pre-pandemic timelines. And that's for the average home. It takes longer for larger houses. Shortages and lead times are averaging 18 to 24 weeks for most all types of building products. In some cases, materials are available, but contractors can't get them to the job site. For example, concrete is often readily available, but because of the labor shortage, suppliers cannot get drivers to deliver it. And sometimes when materials are right over the state line, contractors are limited by laws and regulations regarding who can actually move them and bring them to the state. To keep construction projects from stalling as little as possible, many builders and suppliers are limiting customer selections and requesting that clients make all their selections up front. They also want them to choose alternative products as a backup. That's something all of us can do if we're building. Make the selections early and make purchases as early as possible also. And have an alternative in mind just in case you can't get your first or second choice. Builders and homeowners are purchasing materials months in advance and storing them in on-site or off-site storage units. Some contractors are also eliminating the homeowner's ability to do change orders on their builds, so make sure you make your selections thoughtfully. To help with production, manufacturers have been reducing their offerings and discontinuing product lines and finishes so that they can streamline their manufacturing process. If you have very specific plans for what you want in your dream house and you don't want to compromise or waver from the ideas that you have saved in House or Pinterest, now may not be the time to build. Waiting for that one specific appliance finish or that one specific tile may add weeks to months to your build. I talked to one of my builder friends yesterday afternoon, and she said to me that she's going to finish the last 2 houses that she's been working on, both of which are large houses that she started more than a year and a half ago. She said she's going to take a break from building until the supply chain issues are resolved. It may not only be difficult to find materials for your build, but it's likely harder to find contractors too. And once you do, both materials and labor will probably cost more than they did before the pandemic. That builder friend of mine said that many of her materials have gone up 50%. 50%. And because business is booming, many subcontractors are turning down work that they deem as too difficult, too specialized, or too time-consuming. It sounds pretty discouraging, I know, but if you're willing to spend more time and money to build now, there are a few things you can do to protect yourself and your sanity. Number 1, consult with an attorney before entering into a construction contract, even before the construction of your new home begins. or even before the design of your dream home begins. That way, you know what special clauses your contractor is putting into your contract given the state of the supply chain. Number 2, if you can, request a fixed price for your project. Now, it's unlikely that in this market you'll get it, but that would be ideal for someone building. Many contractors, though, are not willing to bear the entire risk for price increases. Instead, they're requiring the price of the project to be determined by the cost of the work plus a fee for the contractor. But also get a guaranteed maximum price that you're comfortable with if you can. Number 3, be flexible with your selections. Now is not the time to order tile from China or specialized materials from across the ocean. Flexibility with selections will help with delays and potential price increases. Ask contractors and suppliers which materials they can get readily, where there is no evidence of supply chain disruption. Then make your selections based on that information. And communicate with your contractor and ask him to tell you as soon as he realizes there may be a delay in getting materials that you've selected. It's recommended that your contract allows for change orders not subject to overhead or administrative charges if you're placing the change order to avoid significant shipment delays. And number 4, consider providing a bonus if the contractor finishes his part of the project early and within the budget. A lawyer advised me to add a liquidated damages clause to my contracts. That clause requires that the contractor pay a daily fee for each day that the contract is late beyond the agreed upon completion date. A liquidated damages clause might help, but it might also hurt your project. Contractors might not bid on projects that have a liquidated damage clause, and I have mixed feelings about it. Yes, it may motivate the contractor to finish his work on time, but it might also motivate him to cut corners so he can finish his work on time. I'm not sure what the right answer is. Building a house with these ongoing supply chain issues is not for the faint of heart. It's especially difficult for those of us who like to have a plan and a fairly accurate schedule and cost breakdown and a reasonable level of control. It's unlikely that you will have any of those things if you decide to build now. With this information in mind, if you still think you want to move forward with your build now, knowing the challenges of the supply chain disturbances, I'm wishing you all the best. Just be prepared to be flexible and patient. Well, that's all I have for you this week. I hope it wasn't too discouraging. What I really want to do is just help you to make informed decisions. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll come back next time for another episode of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU. Please remember that the purpose of this podcast is simply to educate and inform. It's not a substitute for professional advice. The information that you hear is based only on the opinions, research, and experiences of my guests and myself. That information might be incomplete, it's subject to change, and it may not apply to your project. In addition, building codes and requirements vary from region to region, so always consult a professional about specific recommendations for your home.